Call to order the meeting of the Ventura County Air Pollution Control District Hearing Board. It's 5:30 on September 9th, 2012. Tonight we're hearing a 2013. Thank you. We have two items on the agenda tonight. One is a petition for a hearing for based on a petition for a short variance, docket number 847 from the Ventura Regional Sanitation District, and the other is the election of officers for the hearing board, chair and vice chair. The agenda that's published has the election as item number 3, but we're going to put that until after we finish the hearing with everybody's consensus. Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Board Member Gasparino?
Here.
Board Member Herlock?
Here.
Board Member Stubblefield?
Here.
And Board Member Murphy?
Here.
All those who will be giving testimony tonight, if you'd please rise and the clerk will administer the oath.
Please raise your right hand. You do solemnly affirm that the testimony you are about to give in the matter now pending before this board will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Yes.
As I said, this is a hearing on petition number 847, petition of the Ventura Regional Sanitation District for a short variance from Air Pollution Control District, Rule 29C, condition on permits, violation of permit conditions. Will the members of the control district please introduce yourselves?
My name's Dan Searcy. I am the compliance manager.
Chris Cody, I'm the air quality specialist.
Thank you. Representatives of the petitioner, please introduce yourselves.
I'm Frank Kiesler, Director of Operation for Ventura Regional Sanitation.
I'm Mark Potter, Technical Operations Supervisor.
And I'm Dick Baldwin, an air quality consultant to VRSD.
Thank you. Before we hear your case, I'd like to ask representatives of the petitioner if you have had a chance to see the draft order that we have in front of us. Is there going to be anything in this draft that causes you problems in terms of conditions, schedules, otherwise?
In our presentation, we request a change to the order regarding the reporting, that we ask that we have Monday reporting until such time that the compliance with the permit requirements has been demonstrated to APCD, so that we don't need to continue to report beyond the compliance date.
Okay, we can discuss that later then. Could you present your petition and your case, please?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
before you get started, I'd like it to be known that I do and am familiar with Mr. Richard Baldwin, who's representing the petitioner as a consultant. We have no social, nor do we have any current and or really past professional working relationship, but we do know each other from the fact that we both belong to a large international professional engineering association. But other than that, I don't think anything that would be said here or decided upon at the hearing would hinder my position here in terms of what I need to do on behalf of the Air Pollution Control District.
Yep. Thank you. Does any member of the district or the petitioner have any issues with Mr. Gasparino being on the hearing board tonight? Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I too am a longtime friend of Dick Baldwin's. In fact, he mentored me many years ago and got me involved in this kind of work. But I'm not going to cut him any slack whatsoever just because of that.
Thank you. Any problems with Mr. Stubblefield on either side? Okay. Go ahead and present your petition.
Thank you. In regards to background on our petition, the VRSD operates 3 closed landfills that are required by APCD to have a landfill gas collection system and landfill gas control device. We refer to the 3 landfills collectively as the Oxnard landfills. They are comprised of the Baylor, Coastal, and Santa Clara landfills. And the Santa Clara landfill is also known as the City of Oxnard River Ridge Golf Course. Yes. Get a little closer. Is that better? Okay. You want me to start over? Okay. Regarding background on this variance request, the Ventura Regional Sanitation District operates 3 closed landfills that are required by APCD to have a landfill gas collection and system and landfill gas control device. We refer to the 3 landfills collectively as the Oxnard landfills, and they are comprised of the Baylor, Coastal, and Santa Clara landfills. The Santa Clara landfill is also known as the City of Oxnard River Ridge Golf Course. A map showing the location of the 3 landfills was provided to you by the clerk. The map also shows the location of the flare and the nearest residential area to the flare. The Oxnard landfills have been closed for a number of years. Baylor was closed in 1998, Coastal landfill was closed in 1989, and the Santa Clara landfill was closed in 1982. Since closure, the landfills have continued to generate landfill gas that contains non-methane organic compounds, usually referred to as NMOC. Active and closed landfills generate landfill gas, or LFG, due to the decomposition of the refuse that have been placed in them. To meet the landfill gas destruction requirement of APCD, a flare is located at the north end of the coastal landfill. The coastal flare station provides destruction of the LFG for the 3 Oxnard landfills. The 3 landfills in the flare are covered by Title V Federal Operating Permit number 01399. For a number of years, Cavanta Power operated a series of cogeneration engines using this LFG to generate electricity. Over the years, the LFG volume that was produced declined to such an extent that it was no longer economical for Cavanta to produce electricity, so Cavanta closed the power plant in November 2009. Since closure of the Cavanta plant, the coastal flare has been the sole LFG destruction device for the Oxnard landfills. The coastal flare equipment has 2 blowers, of which one normally operates to apply a vacuum on the gas collection wells and pull the gas into the LFG flare for destruction. In the past year, the 1500 SCFM coastal flare has operated at a destructive capacity of approximately 750 to 800 SCFM total. The current individual LFG flow rates are approximately 400 SCFM from Baylor landfill, 300 SCFM from the coastal landfill, and 100 SCFM from the Santa Clara landfill. When the LFG management system and the destruction devices were originally permitted, the LFG generation rate was higher, and therefore there were 2 shore-light flares installed with a permitted flow of 1,500 SCFM for each unit. When the LFG generation rate dropped below 1,500 SCFM, the necessity for 2 flares no longer existed. Therefore, since April 2010, only one of the 2 originally permitted shore-light flares have been maintained and utilized. The second flare was taken out of service and is no longer on the Title V permit. It is worth noting that the LFG being generated at these landfills will continue to decline over time. Regarding necessity for the variance, on Sunday, July 28, 2013 at 7:55 p.m., the coastal flare experienced a failure of the burner array and shut down. The Ventura APCD was notified on Monday, July 29th. This led to a discussion between VRSD and APCD staff. Following this discussion, an emergency variance was applied for and granted on July 31, 2013 by the hearing board member, Stephen Herlock, after a hearing was conducted via telephone conference. The purpose of this petition for a short-term variance is to allow VRSD time to replace the burners in the shore-light flare. 2 pictures have been provided to you by the clerk that clearly show the damage to the burner array. Regarding VRSD response to equipment failure, the manufacturer of the shore-light flares is no longer in business. This necessitated an extensive search for qualified vendors and contractors to provide replacement parts and perform the necessary repair work. Oceanside Engineering Manufacturing, OEM, was identified as the best source for both parts and repair services. They were recommended repeatedly by various flare manufacturers and flare maintenance contractors. OEM has access to the original shore-light burner plans specifications and is able to provide replacement parts identical to the original shore-light parts which failed. On August 8, 2013, VRSD engaged OEM to fabricate the replacement burner array and perform necessary repairs and installation. On September 4, 2013, OEM estimated that the new burner array will be fabricated, installed, and ready for system startup within 4 weeks, which is approximately October 2, 2013. VRSD has scheduled a source test contractor to perform a source test on the repaired flare on October 14, 2013. A typical time frame for receipt of a final report after performance of the source test is 3 to 4 weeks. Therefore, VRSD anticipates being in full compliance by November 11th, 2013. On Thursday, August 15th, 2013, VRSD initiated the process to install a portable temporary LFG flare during the period needed to repair the Surelight flare. This portable flare arrived at the Coastal Flare Facility on Monday, August 19th, 2013, and after piping and controls were modified to accommodate the temporary flare, it has been running without incident since startup on Tuesday, August 20th. The temporary flare destructs approximately 210 SCFM of LFG at a temperature averaging 1,450 degrees, and VRSD staff visits the temporary flare daily except on weekends to ensure it is operating properly. The Coastal Flare operational performance prior to failure. The flare has operated since October 2012 without any Title V startup, shutdown, malfunction plan instances. These SSMPs are what might be considered a reportable upset or breakdown. The last SSMP was in October 2012 for a blower malfunction. The VRSD conducted its biannual greenhouse gas methane destruction efficiency source testing on June 3, 2013, and meter calibration on June 8, 2013 at the Coastal Flare. No indication of burner failure was evident at the testing and calibrating events, and the test demonstrated the flare emissions were in compliance with all permit conditions. The clerk has provided you with a handout titled SCEC Test Letter Report dated June 23, 2013. Pardon me? June 27th, 2013. The clerk has also given you a graph that illustrates the daily LFG flow to the flare for the past 6 months. You'll see the average flow was approximately 750 to 800 SCFM. As noted previously, during this time period, there were no SSMP events, and the flare operation was consistent with no indications of operational problems. The graph shows that the flare was operating very consistently until its catastrophic failure on July 28th. Regarding flare maintenance and inspection practices pre- and post-failure, VRSD has a regimented maintenance schedule for the flares that it operates, and the system components have varying intervals of recommended service. Prior to the burner array failure, the inspection interval for this part of the system was quarterly, even though the manufacturer recommended inspection interval for similar burner arrays is on an annual basis. After resumption of normal flare operations, VRSD personnel will inspect the burner system monthly. On an annual basis, VRSD will have a third-party flare specialist, such as OEM, conduct a comprehensive flare inspection covering the entire system with emphasis on the burner array. Regarding requests for changes to the draft variance order, under reporting requirements, page 8, number 1, VRSD requests the reports be submitted every Monday during the period of this order or until such time that the compliance with the permit requirements has been demonstrated to APCD. This would avoid continued reports after we have demonstrated compliance. And that concludes my presentation. At this time, I'd be pleased to answer any questions.
I'd like to invite the board members to ask the petitioner questions. Let's start with Mr. Gasparino. No? Mr. Murphy?
I'm not a technical, and so this, when we're looking at the order, this deals with non-methane organic compounds. Is methane organic compound? Is methane also generated by the landfill?
Yes. I'm not sure why we use the non-methane. That's a regulatory term used by the agency rules.
I mean, methane isn't separated out from the non-methane when it's going through the flares, is it?
No.
You got a temporary flare now, and it only handles 200 as opposed to 800. Tell me why you've got a contraption again. I'm just not an engineer, and you're drawing from the various fields. You've got negative pressure, and it goes to the flare. Then, if you light the flare and it's going off, why isn't it burning 800 rather than only 200? I don't understand.
It's the device is sized for roughly 210 SCFM. In the case of the flare that failed, it was a larger device that had a larger burner array. So the burner array is sized for a certain throughput. And our ability to acquire a larger temporary flare, we weren't able to find one bigger than this one. So this one's sized to flow the 210, and we viewed that as better than having no flow at all. So we pursued that one.
So what happens to the other 600? It isn't brought in by the negative pressure to the flare?
Correct. We're not collecting it, but at the same time, we've increased the surface sweep monitoring of the surface of the landfill to monitor for emissions there, and we've found the performance has been very typical of what it was when we had the 800 SCFM flow. We're also monitoring the perimeter probes, and we have had one increase in above 5%, but it has now been returned to below 5%. So as the monitoring is conducted through this period until such time we have the flare repaired and back to running normally, we're doing this increased monitoring. And if we do see emissions or exceedances in a particular area, we adjust the well field to focus the flow in those areas. We have a limited amount of flow of 210, but we're trying to apply it in the areas that require that attention. But we've been pleasantly surprised in that, generally speaking, the surface emissions have stayed very similar to what they were prior. I think we've had one emission, and it was generally I think it was at a vault in a buried vault in the surface of the landfill, which are typical places that you see these exceedances even when the flare is operating. In reading the draft order, it seemed like there was, after this, you really only found one instance where it was above the allowed 500 ppm type, and then since then you've been in the temporary flare, and there have been no exceedances since you put in the temporary flare. Mm-hmm. Are you anticipating there may be exceedances now that you've got the temporary flare in? Well, our hope and expectation is that the flare's been running for about a month now, a little over a month, since August 20th. So for 3 weeks, and we're continuing to do our weekly monitoring on the probes. I believe the draft order calls for us to do weekly surface sweeps. Is that correct, Dan? Weekly surface sweeps, or every 2 weeks surface sweeps. So we're doing monthly now. We're going to step that up, and our expectation is that we'll see continued the same types of results, because we were seeing those results before the temporary flare was installed. So our hope and expectation is that we'll continue to see the consistent monitoring results.
And this, if I could direct this to Mr. Baldwin, that the finding we have to find is that there is or will be a violation in the future here. And with the flare, temporary flare, I'm not finding there is right now an ongoing violation. And you're saying that, well, since we put this temporary flare in, we haven't had it. Is there still, do we have the grounds for making this finding, Mr. Baldwin, or is a temporary variance actually necessary?
The permit requires operation of the flare that's been permitted, and that flare is no longer able to operate and won't be for another month or so, and therefore they are in violation of the requirement to have that flare and the flow rates that they're permitted at.
Yeah, well, you know, and maybe that's just because I don't have the entire permit in front of me, but I'm looking at in the order it's got conditions A, conditions B, and condition D of condition 4 of the federal permit, and I didn't see that a particular type of flare was required. It just, the only requirement it seemed was to keep it below 500 ppm, which you are doing.
So far, there is the potential for that to be exceeded, though.
Potential, yeah, not an expectation.
Hopefully not.
Okay. That's all that I have.
Mr. Stubblefield? I have a couple questions. Some of these are to provide information. The VRSD is a governmental agency or a district, is that correct? And
Yes, we're a special district.
are you part of city, county? How are you related to the usual city, county, state parts of government?
I believe we're a special district, much like a water district or other utility district.
Okay.
So I guess we're independent of the
Does
city.
the county manage your finances?
No.
When you put in this temporary flare, did you reopen all the valves in the system or just some of them? Did I make that question clear? When you said you shut down all the valves, wasn't clear whether that was 3 or 1 for every wellhead or...
It was, essentially it was 1 valve per landfill.
Okay.
So all 3 valves were opened when the temporary flare went into operation. And recently when we saw the increase in that 1 Baylor reading, we adjusted some valves to compensate and try to influence that area, and it seemed to work.
Those are sub-valves within the landfill?
Yes, each landfill has a series of valves, but
Mr. Kiesler, you talked about what I think I heard you say was that you're going to change your inspection procedure to actually do a visual inspection on the burner. Is that something that you have not been doing as part of your regular maintenance and inspection?
The flare was being observed and inspected on a monthly basis, and we're going to continue to do that. We're going to put particular emphasis on looking at the burner array, and given this experience, to just pay some additional attention to it. Much like what's noted in the presentation, the typical flare manufacturers recommends an annual inspection. We're going to visually inspect them monthly and quarterly, shut the flare down, actually enter the flare and look at them, and then also bring in a third-party flare event contractor to have a further inspection of the burner units. Seeing that the extended period of time it takes to repair the flare that's no longer supported by the manufacturer, we feel it's appropriate to increase the frequency beyond what we had done previously.
But when you said that there were these various checks and inspections and calibrations this summer, that did not include a visual inspection of the burner?
I wasn't present, but I'm told it was part of the inspection.
So the visual, you did actually visually see the burner in June and then it went out in July, because it looks like it's in terrible shape, not something that would happen in a month.
the burners were inspected, especially before the source test. The source test had 3 runs. Each run had a 99.9% destruction efficiency. The current state of the burners we wouldn't have that destruction result if they had been in failure mode at that time.
But is this visual inspection part of your permit, or is it just part of your maintenance that's internal to your company or to your agency operation?
It's specific to our internal practices.
Would you have a problem with that being a part of your permit? I don't know whether that's feasible at this point.
I hadn't thought about it, but at first glance, I don't think so. I mean, it's something we need to do, and we will do.
I have a question a little bit in follow-up to what Mr. Murphy said. I'm not understanding exactly how the landfills and the blowers and the flare work together. Is there what amounts to a venturi or something on the flare, so the flare won't accept more than 200? And how do you control? You're using the same blower as you were using for the 800 SCFM burner.
The temporary flare has orifices that are sized to only flow that amount of gas, as opposed to the permanent flare that had the failure. The orifices and number of orifices is greater and could accommodate a larger flow.
Okay, so it's the flare that's controlling.
Yes.
So the back pressure on this flare may be higher than the other one or something. Okay. When you do this perimeter probe and the surface sweeps, how are those different? Do you use the same sensor?
The surface sweeps are done with a flame ionization detector, and within I believe 3 inches of the surface of the landfill on a 100-foot grid. So we're walking across the landfill and at, I think, 30-meter separation back and forth across the landfill, monitoring the surface of the landfill with a flame ionization detector. I believe we're using a PID, photo ionization. FID. No, for the probes. I think that's. We're using a photo ionization detector for the subsurface probes, and they're attached to a fitting on the probe, and the valve is open, and then the device pulls a vacuum on the probe until it reaches a steady reading, and that's what we record.
That's your perimeter probe?
Yes.
So those are permanent little holes in the ground.
Correct.
They both report NMOC?
We're measuring as methane, NMO, so all methane and all the other organics, yes.
Okay, I don't have any further questions of the petitioner. Mr. Stubblefield?
So there are 3 landfills. I know about Baylord because I used to take my trash there before it was closed. The other 2 are in close proximity?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
just curious how the gases are directed from the 3 landfills to this one burner array. Is that correct?
That's
they
correct.
don't each
That's
have
correct.
their own standalone setup, correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
Is it piped?
Yes, there's a series of pipes.
How is it collected above each landfill so that it all goes into the pipe to the...
There's wells drilled into the landfill. It's vertical and horizontal collectors. So there's vertical and horizontal wells in
I'm just curious
inside the
because
trash.
I'm not a scientist or an engineer, but I would assume these gases could just migrate straight up to the soil,
And what we've done is we've
sedimentary
injected.
layers and into the atmosphere.
Correct. And that's
So what prevents them from doing so? Is there a cap that
there's a cap. There's a final closure on the landfill. It's a soil cover.
impermeable for the gases to get through?
It's a soil cover, so it's maintained. I think it's some 5 feet thick. But then, in addition to that, there's a well collection network. So we've injected wells installed wells into the refuse column on all 3 landfills, and all those are networked into the piping system that the flare applies a vacuum to. And then each wellhead has a valve to control the flow at each wellhead. So if we have an emission in a particular area on the landfill, we can increase the vacuum in that part of the landfill, and it applies a vacuum to the inside of the landfill to pull the gas into those pipes before it goes out the top or out the bottom.
Creating a pressure differential. So
Correct. So it draws it to the collection wells. And then then there's main headers that bring the pipes that bring all the gas from the 3 different facilities to that one single flare.
And you are or are not running the blower?
We are running the blower.
You are running it?
Yes. And that's how we apply the vacuum to the field, the blower imposes.
So, like Dan, I'm not clear. What happened to the 75% of the gases that the temporary flare cannot handle? Are they still there?
Presumably, yes. And they're not showing up in the surface emissions. They're not showing up in any large degree in the perimeter probes, which are subsurface emissions.
So you don't know where they are?
There's
Hunches?
it could be that they're emitting at a low level across the entire landfill, and it's not exceeding the 500.
Because the amount of gas being generated is diminishing
correct.
as the landfills mature.
Correct. But it's, and I think we're fortunate, and we're seeing the performance we are, and that the probes are not in a large degree seeing any migration, and nor are we seeing a significant increase in surface emissions.
So while the temporary flare is being operated, you might or might not be in violation of your mandated threshold for methane, non-methane organic compounds.
Correct. There's the
Depending
prospect
on-
for that.
Because
Yes.
it's not a steady state amount of gas that's
Correct.
generated by the 3 landfills.
Correct.
Kind of
And
goes
presumably
up
we
and
were able to collect 800.
down. I mean, in
and-
general, it's going down.
Yes,
right?
over time it will decrease, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Is it correct to assume that your perimeter probes are those things that are used to detect migration off the landfill into the residential areas?
Correct.
Can you tell me when the last time you ever had any indication that there was migration?
I can't off the top of my head. Mark, can you say? We don't have the data available, but we could certainly bring.
Okay, well, the reason I ask is that I understand the logistics of landfills and all that kind of stuff, and certainly watering the golf course will, mitigate a lot of stuff coming up to the surface. My only interest would be, even though you do have a residence 130 feet away, if you have perimeter probes in that area to detect, migration, that's really critical. Having had past experience with the city of LA, Sheldon, Arleta, we had serious problems with migration into the gas meter vaults, and several homes could have exploded. So that draws the question. But if your perimeter probes are working and you have a sampling program that can mitigate that, then that's my interest in this whole thing. So you're indicating that you are doing those samplings.
That's correct, on a weekly basis.
Okay,
And
all right.
I don't have the data in front of me, but it is my understanding that those probes have been below the regulatory limits for some time prior to the flare failure.
All
But
right,
I
as long as
certainly-
you're doing them at least weekly and not maybe even more frequently would be advisable. I appreciate that.
Okay.
Thank you.
I have another, could you explain again what change you'd like in the reporting? I didn't, I hear something about Mondays or something?
Yeah, under item, or page 8, number 1, there's a request to submit a report every Monday, and we're asking that, and it says for the period of this order, and we're asking that if we can demonstrate to APCD that we're in compliance with the permit requirements, that report requirement terminate at that date rather than for the term of the variance. So if we achieve compliance a month prior, we would no longer have to make those reports.
Okay, let me take a look at this.
I'm sorry, I couldn't understand what you were saying. Could you repeat what it is you're asking, the change you're asking for on number 1 under reporting requirements?
Sure. As it reads now, it indicates that for the period of the variance that we would submit a report every Monday, and we're asking that be, it says every Monday during the period of this order, and we're adding the additional language of or until such time that compliance with the permit requirements has been demonstrated to APCD, thus avoiding submittal of reports that are no longer necessary. So.
I don't have any further questions of the petitioner at this time. Does the district have any questions of the petitioner? Does the district have any comments on this petition?
Well, I feel like the gas is going to be generated regardless of what they do. So, and the best they were able to do was to bring in a smaller flare, and we felt like they were trying to reduce emissions to the greatest extent that they're required to. So we don't have any problems with anything. We feel like they're doing the best they can to try to eliminate any kind of surface leaks.
Okay. Board members have questions for the district?
Yeah, I'd like, based upon the request of the petitioner, do you have any objections with the elimination of the Monday report if they achieve compliance before the order closure date?
No. Once they're in compliance, that'll be fine.
Okay, I agree too. Thank you.
Other questions of the district? I guess I have a couple. The main one is this, is my concern that we haven't, I mean, at the time that we did the emergency variance, they were in violation of A and B, and I'm not sure about C, but I'm on page 5, item 1, A, B, and C. I'm concerned that we're not really stating what their violation is at this time, because I don't think that they're, not having their permit in front of me, I don't think they're in violation of A or B. C is a potential, but it seems like they're in violation of some details in their permit about the capacity of the flare they're using, which is not listed here.
Well, we felt like condition 4A, 4B, and 4D kind of covered everything. 4D, there's a possibility that they could have leaks even with the other flare, so we felt like that was going to be a violation. With the smaller flare, we're hoping that every wellhead is going to still have negative pressure, but I guess we can't be as sure given the fact that the flow rate's less. And that was B. And then for 4A,
What 4A are you talking about?
for permit condition 4A, which would be on
We don't have
page
their
5.
permit up here.
Yeah, on page,
It's on page 5.
it would be page 5, number 1, item 8,
Oh, okay,
talks about condition 4A.
okay.
Sorry.
Oh, I see, all right.
With the smaller flows, they may not be collecting gas from every cell. I mean, it's likely that they are, but we can't really be sure. So we felt like that needed to be included.
Would it make sense to include a violation that they're not using the flare that they're permitted to be using?
I don't know if the permit, well, I mean, they're not using the permitted flare, and I spoke with the engineering manager. We basically elected to allow them to use a temporary flare rather than no flare at all. We
Well,
felt like
that's good on everybody's part.
like
yeah.
some degree of control would be better than nothing at all.
Right.
We don't, and that violation would be a Rule 10 violation, which, my understanding, there is no variance from the requirement to obtain a permit to operate. And I believe council could probably talk about that, but there is, you've never seen an order here where there was somebody who needed to have a permit and they were here to try to obtain a variance from that requirement. So we, as a policy decision, we had made the choice that we were going to allow a smaller flare. So I don't really see that as a violation.
I agree. I think it shows conscientiousness on their part and on your part to get rid of as much as you can. But I'm concerned that the violations that are stated here are not actually occurring. But something is occurring. If we could figure out how to state that, I'd be more comfortable.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I could. Their permit's about an inch thick, so I wasn't able to bring everything with me. But basically, what kind of applies to the landfill is in this one section here, which is probably which is about a dozen pages thick. We can look through and see if we can find other problems, but we felt like those those three conditions probably describe best what the problem was, what the violation was.
Does the petitioner have any suggestions to help us with this? Help me with this? Okay. Mr. Murphy?
This is for the district, because the finding that we have to make is the petitioner is or will be in violation of District Rule 29C and the federal permit, et cetera. And as Mr. Hurley was stating, that it appears that once they put in the temporary flare, you can't look at least what you selected out of their permit to put down and say, yeah, there is a violation, or you can't say definitely there will be a violation type of thing. If we gave you 5 minutes, could you look at their permit and see, oh, here's something in their permit that the board can make the finding that there is or will be a violation?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I could look at what I have and see if that's included. I know that there's a source testing requirement and that the flare is required to meet certain limits, and the temporary flare hasn't been tested and won't be tested. They will test the regular flare once it's repaired. But short of requiring them to do a source test on a piece of equipment that's going to be there for maybe another month, and I don't have any way of actually knowing whether that's in violation either. It probably is, but I don't know for sure. I would have to test it.
Okay, there was a comment over here.
It's an interesting point you've raised, because where we're at is we can't prove compliance and we can't prove that we absolutely will be in violation. The problem is that the landfill gas will continue to build over time because it can't take out as much as is being built, but the cap works pretty well up to a point on the landfill. And so will the gas break through or won't it? And it's not easy to predict that. But it could, and then if it does and exceeds the limits of APCD, then VRSD is in violation. That's simple. That's probably the main reason for the variance, is because it's not possible to predict how much the pressure is going to be will build up, and whether or not the smaller blower can stay ahead of the gas generation over the next 4 weeks or so, or 8 weeks, 4 weeks.
Mr. Stubblefield?
I'm just curious why did the district suggest this 200 SCFM flare as a suitable, adequate, temporary flare? Why not? Are there no 800 SCFM other than the Sure Light that's no longer in business flares available that the petitioner could use while the new installation is being rebuilt?
We were told by VRSD that this 210 SCFM flare was the largest capacity flare of this type that they could find. And so,
Pardon me? Of what
it was
type?
the largest capacity flare of this type that they could find. So we made a decision that some control is better than no control. And that was because we did have concerns about gas
Technically,
leaks.
it would be difficult to install a gang of 4 of these 200 SCFM.
I don't know. I suppose if you could find 4 of these flares.
Oh, so it's difficult to even find one.
I can't speak to that. I can only.
Yeah, it took us a
speak
couple
to what I
weeks
was
to
told.
locate this one. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you, Dan. It took us several weeks to locate this one flare. We had found a larger, what they call a candlestick flare. This is an enclosed flare, so you can't see the flame, and you get destruction that would be somewhat comparable to our original enclosed flare. We did find a larger candlestick flare, but it would be an open flame which we didn't really, between visual concerns of people seeing it at night and the destruction efficiency, we felt the 210 one was a better fit for us and more
I was
comparable.
just curious. I know nothing about, I know what it's doing, but I assume you can't just go out and buy one anywhere.
Yeah, they're usually a long lead item to get a...
They're purpose-built. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
So I want to ask VRSD, given these conditions, is there a way for you to demonstrate or to prove that you are meeting these conditions, that you are collecting gas from each area, cell, or group of cells, and that your collection system is applying negative pressure to each wellhead? I'm just wondering if you were able to demonstrate that. That may be part of the argument for getting a variance, is that you cannot demonstrate that you can get negative pressure to each wellhead.
And as Dick said, I think it's the uncertainty, and our concern is that over time the gas, if we were collecting 800 SCFM before and now we're getting 200, that there is a potential for a buildup, and a likely expectation that there would be a buildup over time, and at that, either the surface emissions might exceed the 500 or our ability to apply vacuum and maintain a negative pressure at each well we may not be able to maintain that with the smaller flows.
One other point is that this hearing was noticed for this a violation of Rule 29C and these particular conditions, and if we were to pursue other conditions or other requirements of the rule, we would have to hold another hearing, reschedule and hold another hearing. We can't bring in other issues because they haven't been noticed.
I think perhaps if we could include in the order some facts, and I'll try and paraphrase what I think I heard about the equilibrium between the landfills and the blower and the flare. The flare will only accept 200 CFM, 210 CFM, which means that the back pressure on the flare is going to be higher than the back pressure on the 800 CFM flare. And normally the way these blowers work, that's going to result in the back pressure on the blower being higher than it was when it was drawing. This may be a constant displacement blower, but when the pressure across it on the front end of it is higher than the pressure on the back end of it is going to be higher as well. And I think that we could probably all agree that the collection system may or may not have negative pressure, but is not the same negative pressure that was before the breakdown of the 800 CFM flare. And I think that would, if we could figure out a way without changing the language of the permit to get that fact into this order as part of our findings, if everybody has agreed that that's a reasonable statement with what I thought I heard you say about how these things work. Any comments from board members on it? Mr. Gasparino, you're probably more familiar with this than most of us.
Yeah, I guess my only comment would be gets back to the issue of the explosive and hazard situation that could be developed, and that's unknown, and that's why I was asking the questions about the perimeter sampling. Right. And for all practical purposes, I'm comfortable with the way the district has set this up, and I believe the petitioner does as well. In terms of meeting the criteria and the facts, I'm comfortable with the way it's set up right now. You could do some certainly minimal wording if you wish that doesn't change anything, but I think that the potential is very great that you will be out of compliance. And number two, I'm still concerned about the migration. Working at the golf course as I do, how do you know when you have gas coming up to the surface when somebody throws a cigar out and there's a small explosion? I mean, I don't know. That's ultimately my concern, okay? And the fact that you have the perimeter wells and you are sampling, that's the most important thing in my mind. And so the way the conditions of the permit are written up, I'm comfortable with the way they are right now. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Could I ask the district something? If we were to put in finding of fact number 1, change the wording to the petitioner is or potentially will be in violation, and if the state doesn't like that change, by the time we get word back that they don't like it, we'll probably have the 800 flare in, so we'll say, okay, we'll never do that again. Could we make that change? Would the petitioner object to such a change in the finding?
No, we'd be fine with that.
Does council have a problem with that?
Well, I mean, you're technically not making the, I mean, I can't say for certain you'd be making the finding that's required by the statute, but on that same point, I don't know that you necessarily have to interpret the word will to mean definite. I mean, I understand that's seemingly the equivalent, that would be a prerequisite to the word will, but I mean, you can never say anything will happen for certain in the future anyway. I think it maybe death and taxes, but I think that this evidence that they've presented today it's up to your board, but would qualify as will, and you wouldn't need the potentially before will.
I think I could go along with that. Mr. Soberfield?
Council, could it just say the petitioner is or could be in violation? Would that be?
Well, the reason I'm hesitating on that is that the statutory finding is or will be. So I think it would be safe to stick with the statutory required finding. But I feel that even if you leave the wording as or will be, you still have enough evidence in the record, substantial evidence to support will be based on all these potential hazards that have been discussed and illuminated by the petitioner today. To say that it will be, even though it's not 100% certain it will be, it's in the variance. Because if you don't have the variance, then you don't have the conditions, you don't have the reporting mechanisms, and then you might run into a situation where you're in an emergency where it does happen, and now you're back here and you haven't had the reporting, and then it might be a worse situation.
Could I ask council a question? Are you essentially like saying it for the word will, kind of like saying, depends on what the definition of is, that if we all understand that our definition of will here on the board means potentially will, then knowing we have that understanding when we utilize the word will, we can all vote in favor of it, of the finding?
Well, I mean, we could take time and I could research what the cases say on that, on what the definition of will is in the sentence, but, there's certainly a number of examples of cases that have interpreted the word shall to really mean may, so, I mean, I think that it's up to your hearing board here how you want to interpret it, but even if you were to just go with will, it's seemingly enough substantial evidence in the record to support that.
Thank you.
I guess I'd like to, unless the district or the petitioner has any more comments or questions, I'd like to close the hearing and review this within the board. Any members of the public wish to speak? I'm comfortable now with what I've heard from council and Mr. Gasparino and the district and the petitioner to leave the wording of one as is and live with it myself. So what's the will of the board?
I'm comfortable with it. Yeah.
I'd like to move then that we adopt the proposed order with the change in the finding recommended by the petitioner and agreed to by the district.
You're talking about the change in the reporting schedule?
Yes.
I will second that.
Any discussion on that motion? Clerk, could you please call the roll?
Board Member Gasparino?
Aye.
Board Member Hurlock?
Aye.
Board Member Murphy?
Aye.
Board Member Stubblefield?
Aye.
Your petition is granted, and good luck. I'd like to, I think your installation of the 200 CFM flare was a good move and shows serious concern on your part, conscientiousness. Did you want this to be introduced as evidence? If not, we didn't really introduce it. I think we have it available to board members, but it's not part of the hearing record, if that's okay with you.
I think since the board considered it, this should be part of the record.
All right.
This being this,
Any objections to the
how many
board? If we-
pages?
It was submitted, okay. This will be part of the record then. Okay, gentlemen, thank you.
Thank you.
We have another item on the agenda, and that's the election of chair and vice chair. Any discussion before we ask for motions on this?
Who's that, Dan?
I'll make the comment that ever since I've been on the board, the tradition, historical approach has been for the vice chair, the current vice chair, to become the chair, and I'm not sure who. Then the most recent member or next eligible member would be the vice chair for the next year or so. So
Is this for a one-year term?
it's approximately 1 year.
It's a 10-year term.
So could I get a motion just to either nominate a candidate or to get us a chair and a vice chair?
I move that the vice chair be identified as the incoming chair for the hearing board.
That would be Mr. Murphy.
That's correct.
I'll second Gary's motion.
Can you take the roll?
Board Member Gasparino?
Yes.
Board Member Hurlock?
Yes.
Board Member Murphy?
Yes.
And Board Member Stubblefield?
Yes.
And we need a vice chair.
Move that the vice chair be Mr. Stubblefield.
I think so.
Will you get a second on that?
Second.
Clerk? You take a roll on that?
Board Member Gasparino?
Yes.
Board Member Hurlock?
Yes.
Board Member Murphy?
Yes.
And Board Member Stubblefield?
Yes.
Any other public comments or comments from other board members from the district? Meeting is closed.
Pleasure working with you, council.
Gary, did I hear that you were not going to be alone?
Yes, I was hoping somebody